Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the straw-stuffed, linen-draped, dimly lit bedrooms of medieval Europe. You're lying flat on a wobbly oak bed frame, your head resting on a pillow that smells faintly of dried lavender and sheep's wool. A single beeswax candle flickers nearby, casting shadows that make the wooden beams above look like ribs of some great sleeping beast. You can hear the scratching of mice behind the walls, the creak of someone walking overhead. Or is that just the wind? It's dark. It's musty. And in here, behind thick doors bolted with iron, some truly bizarre rituals unfolded. You'll witness the naked awkwardness of communal beds, the cold, calculated business of marital bedding ceremonies, and yes, the buckets, basins, and all too frequent bed bugs that were standard companions of nightly life. If you're picturing some kind of romantic Game of Thrones fantasy, sorry. You probably won't survive this with your idealism intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's begin in the cold. Because make no mistake, medieval bedrooms were cold. Not just temperature-wise, though that too bitterly so, but in purpose, in presence, in design. Unlike the modern bedroom, a space of privacy and plush retreat bedrooms in the Middle Ages were often public, practical, and punishing. Most people didn't even have bedrooms. If you were poor, and most people were, you likely slept on the dirt floor of a one-room cottage, maybe tucked near the hearth, if you were lucky, wrapped in your one woolen cloak for warmth. Entire families curled up together in a pile indistinguishable from their livestock in the next stall over. Chickens wandered past your feet, a pig snorted beside your bedroll. And in this rustic, hay-scented corner of the world, the idea of sleeping alone was almost laughable. Privacy. That was a luxury for lords and saints. If you lived in a manor house, or better yet, a castle, then you might have a chamber of your own, maybe even a bed large enough to stretch out in. A feather mattress, canopies draped in brocade velvet pillows if you were truly elite. But don't imagine solitude, because if you had a bedroom, someone else was always in it. Servants, for one. You rarely went to sleep without one at the foot of your bed, or curled up nearby on a bench. Sometimes multiple attendants slept in your chamber, tending the fire, standing ready with chamber pots, or simply keeping an eye on things. If you were noble, your bedroom was a place of business, a place where alliances were made and unmade. There were always eyes, always ears. Even royal bedrooms were not sacred. When a noble couple married, their consummation wasn't just expected, it was verified. The bedding ceremony was a public spectacle. Imagine it. You're led to the bed, your robes removed by giggling ladies-in-waiting or solemn guards. Courtiers crowd the room. Someone tosses wine over the covers. There might be music. There might be chanting. There will definitely be watching. Sometimes the bishop gave his blessing. Sometimes the king did. Then the curtains were closed. And even then, you weren't truly alone. Some unlucky courtier might have to stay behind, just outside the drapes, to witness. That meant listening, sometimes waiting to see evidence afterward. This wasn't romance. It was politics. But let's say you weren't noble. You were a baker's apprentice, or a washerwoman, or maybe just a peasant who had somehow lucked into a real bed. That bed, probably stuffed with straw. Maybe feathers if you had a few coins to spare. But straw was more common, cheap, scratchy, and alive. Fleas, lice, and mites loved it. And unless you changed it frequently, it reeked. Rotting straw mixed with sweat, chamber pot fumes, and last week's spilled ale. Some people mixed herbs into the bedding lavender, mint, wormwood to mask the smell. It helped. A little. The mattress lay atop rope slats, hence the phrase, sleep tight. You tightened the ropes before bed using a special tool. Over time, the ropes sagged, and so did your sleep. You might have slept curled in a fetal position, sharing the bed with your siblings, your parents, or your in-laws, all facing the same way like sardines in a can. Heaven help you if someone snored. And what about night clothes? You might imagine a quaint nightshirt and cap, but most people slept naked. Or in the same undertunic they wore all day. Linen for the slightly rich, rough-spun wool for everyone else. If it was winter, you'd pile on layers. Blankets were precious. A single woven wool sheet might cost a month's wages. Most folks just used cloaks or whatever rags they had on hand. Then there was the matter of nighttime relief. Without plumbing, your choices were limited. If you were lucky, your room had a chamber pot, a ceramic or pewter bowl you kept under the bed. If you were less lucky, you had to stumble outside in the dark to the privy. Often, these were shared by multiple families. Rancid, overflowing, and crawling with flies, they were not places anyone wanted to visit after dark. Hence, many people simply used a pot, a corner, or a bit of straw, and prayed the rats kept to themselves. To keep the cold at bay, people sometimes shared beds with strangers. Traveling in, you'd be assigned a spot next to a complete unknown. No asking, no choosing. Just snuggle in knees knocking and try not to make it weird. Bed sharing was so common it developed its own etiquette. Don't hog the blanket. Don't move around too much. And absolutely no funny business unless both parties agreed, in which case, well, that's for another section. Let's linger on the communal nature of sleep a bit longer. In monasteries, dozens of monks might sleep in a shared dormitory. They rose and prayed together at strict hours. In boarding schools, noble children shared long beds head to foot. And in noble households, beds were sometimes a social currency. A guest might be rewarded with a private chamber, or punished with a spot on the floor near the drafty wall. Even in households that could afford multiple beds, the idea of each person having their own room absurd. Children's servants, apprentices, grandparents, all packed into chambers like stacked spoons. You learned to whisper secrets under blankets, to ignore strange sounds in the night, and to pretend the world ended where your edge of the bed began. Of course, the bed wasn't always for sleep. It was for dying, for birthing, for praying, for plotting. It was a battlefield, a sanctuary, and sometimes a trap. What you did there and who you did it with could change your life. Or end it. And we'll get to all of that. But for now, just imagine the weight of a woolen blanket on your chest, the roughness of linen against your cheek, the scent of smoke, sweat, and centuries gone by. You're lying there now, a candle guttering beside you, the world outside frozen silent, and sleep at last feels like it might take you. But not just yet, because we're just getting started. You wake before dawn, or maybe you never truly slept. The floor creaked with every breath of wind, and someone in the bed beside you, your uncle or cousin, or some itinerant friar passing through, snored like a dying ox. Your neck aches from the uneven mattress, and your knees are stiff from curling tightly, trying to claim your few inches of warmth. You shift slightly, trying not to wake anyone, but someone stirs. A mutter, a cough, a fart. Morning is coming. But before we rise, let's linger a little longer in bed. Because this wasn't just a place for sleeping, it was a place for waiting, for whispering, for enduring, and sometimes for giving birth. Childbirth in the medieval world almost always happened in the bedroom. Hospitals, when they existed, were not for birthing. They were for dying. Women gave birth at home, usually on a low pallet bed near the fire. The room would be darkened, the windows shuttered, the door closed tight, no men allowed inside unless absolutely necessary. The only light might come from a single candle flickering like a soul just trying to stay here. The midwife took center stage. She was not only skilled in the physical process of birth, but also acted as a spiritual guardian. She knew the prayers. She knew the saints to call upon. She'd attended dozens, maybe hundreds of births. She'd seen things, too many things. The cries of the mother, the blood, the silence when there should have been sound. Other women gathered the gossips, as they were called. Female friends, relatives, neighbors. They brought broth. They murmured encouragement. They held hands. They wiped brows. They crossed themselves. They also gossiped, which is where the word comes from, those huddled circles of women in candle-lit bedrooms, whispering life into the world while swapping secrets. If the child was born healthy, it was bathed quickly and swaddled tight like a little cloth burrito. If it was weak or sickly, the midwife might perform an emergency baptism, because the medieval bedroom was also the edge of eternity. A baby that died unbaptized could not enter heaven, so water was kept nearby, just in case. And if the mother died, as they often did, the bedding might not even be changed before someone else was laid in it. There was no time. Life moved on. Death in medieval bedrooms was not a stranger. It was a frequent guest. Even when the birthing went well, postpartum care was minimal. The mother was churched weeks later, a ritual cleansing that marked her return to society. Until then, she was cloistered in that bedroom, bleeding, healing, nursing, praying. It's strange to think that something so sacred, so intimate, took place in rooms with no insulation, with animals in the next room, with half the family asleep a few feet away. But that was the way of things. And now let's turn to another function of the bed negotiation. Because in a world with no emails, no phone calls, and no boardrooms, business was often conducted in bedrooms, especially if you were wealthy. The noble's chamber was a place for strategy, for secret meetings, for betrayals whispered between silk sheets. If you were granted an audience in the bedchamber, it meant trust, or seduction, or maybe both. Kings received ambassadors from their beds. Queens plotted with ladies-in-waiting under coverlets stitched with gold. There were even whole political systems built around bedroom access. In France, at Versailles, much later in history, courtiers fought for the privilege of helping the king put on his slippers. In medieval England, the privy chamber was the king's inner sanctum, and those who gained entry wielded tremendous influence. But even centuries earlier, access to someone's sleeping quarters was a form of currency. If you could see a noble in bed, literally or figuratively, you were in. Beds became stages, power plays unfolded beneath canopies, what was whispered in the dark-shaped nations. But those were elite spaces. Let's return to the everyday folk. Let's talk about bedbugs, because they were real and terrible. You couldn't escape them. The straw mattress was alive with them. They nested in the crevices of wood. They crawled up your legs. They bit you in your sleep. You'd scratch for hours and wake with welts. There were folk remedies, ashes rubbed into the bedposts, garlic placed under pillows, the burning of foul-smelling herbs. But mostly, you just lived with them. Same with lice. Everyone had them. They hid in the seams of clothing, nestled in the folds of bed sheets. A good combing helped. A vinegar rinse, maybe. Shaving your head was a last resort, but many did it. Especially monks. You'd rather be bald than infested. Then there were the rats. The sound of them. Scratching. Skittering. Occasionally biting. Babies were sometimes injured in their cradles by rats drawn to the smell of milk. It wasn't uncommon to place iron hoops or netting over sleeping infants to protect them. And yet, despite all this, people still found rest, still curled into each other and dreamed. Because the bed was all there was. No sofas, no recliners, no easy chairs. The bed was your workplace if you were injured, your desk if you were elderly, your altar, your stage, your deathbed. And let's not forget about sleep itself. It wasn't like ours. We sleep in one long block, usually 6 to 8 hours, hopefully uninterrupted. But medieval sleep came in phases. First sleep and second sleep. You'd go to bed after dark, wake up around midnight, spend a few hours doing light tasks, stoking the fire, whispering prayers, even visiting neighbors, and then go back to sleep until dawn. This in-between time was called the watch. It was a liminal space, half dream, half wake, a time for reflection. Some even said it was when the veil between worlds was thinnest. You'd lie there on your back, listening to the snores around you. Maybe you'd turn to the person beside you and talk. Maybe you'd just stare at the beams above your head and think about saints, or sins, or soup. In a world without electricity, night was never fully dark, but it was still magical, still heavy, still full of meaning. You knew the sounds of the night, the hoot of an owl, the cry of a baby, the wind pushing against the shutters, the drip of a leak in the corner. You knew what they meant, and when something changed, when a new sound entered the mix, you noticed. Because the medieval bedroom might have been chaotic, dirty, crowded. But it was yours, a refuge of sorts, at least for a few more hours. Now pull the blanket tighter, roll to your side, and let the night stretch a little longer, because soon we'll talk about what really happened when strangers shared a bed. But not just yet. You're safe. For now. And the story continues. The room is quiet again. The fire's collapsed into embers. The air's gone sharp and the damp has crept in. You're still nestled beneath your coarse wool blanket, every breath a foggy puff in the cold air. But you're not alone, not just because others are breathing beside you, but because in the medieval bedroom, someone was always watching, always listening, and sometimes someone was sharing the bed. Let's talk about bed sharing. Not the romantic kind, at least not necessarily. In the medieval world, bed sharing was ordinary, expected, even encouraged. You didn't just sleep with family. You slept with guests, co-workers, servants, strangers, anyone who needed a place to lay their head. Inns and hostels had a limited number of beds and far too many bodies. A weary traveler might pay a few coins for a spot in a bed that already had 2 or 3 occupants. There was no embarrassment, no awkwardness. It was just how things worked. And this wasn't just a practice for the poor. Even in noble households, bed sharing was common. A lady-in-waiting might sleep beside her mistress, a squire with his knight. It created bonds of loyalty, of trust, of obligation. To share a bed was to be close, to whisper, without others hearing, to see each other in the dark, when masks were off and secrets were safe. It was warm. It was human. It was pragmatic. But it was also complicated, because proximity invites temptation, and the medieval world was obsessed with controlling temptation, especially in the bedroom. If two people of the opposite sex were found sleeping together, even platonically, it raised eyebrows. Not always, but enough. There were rules, customs, rituals designed to keep things proper. One of the most bizarre of these, the bundling board. In parts of medieval Europe, especially in Germanic and Nordic cultures, courting couples were sometimes allowed to share a bed, with restrictions. They might be sewn into separate sleeping sacks, or separated by a thick wooden board laid between them, or tied at the waist to prevent accidental closeness. It was a way to foster intimacy without impropriety, to talk, to touch hands only, to get to know each other in the quiet of night. You might be lying there now on your back, hands folded tightly under your blanket, listening to your betrothed breathe on the other side of the board. You can ask anything, confess your fears, whisper secrets, just don't cross the line, literally. Because if you did and someone found out, there were consequences. Punishments for illicit sex ranged from fines to public penance. In some towns, young lovers were paraded through the streets wearing nothing but their underclothes, forced to confess and repent. In others, parents might disown a daughter or force a hurried wedding. But still, things happened. Because bedrooms, no matter how regulated, were places of risk. Take, for instance, the practice of night visits. It was not uncommon in rural communities for young men to visit young women at night, quietly, respectfully, sometimes even with parental approval. This wasn't necessarily scandalous. In some cultures, it was even ritualized. A kind of soft courtship conducted in whispers and under the covers. They called it courting at the bolster. The couple might lie side by side, separated by a bolster pillow, talking deep into the night. It was meant to be innocent. It often wasn't. And when pregnancies happened, and they did, they were sometimes blamed on the very structure of sleep. "I was just sleeping," she might say. "I didn't know." Sometimes that was true. Sometimes it wasn't. Because the line between sleep and sin was blurry in the dark. So the church intervened. Sermons were preached about the dangers of idle beds. Monks and priests wrote manuals full of advice for avoiding temptation. "Do not lie too long in bed," one warned, "for it leads to sloth and lust." Another advised sleeping with hands outside the covers and never on your stomach. Beds became moral battlegrounds, and monks especially were monitored. In monasteries, the dormitories were arranged so that no one had privacy. Beds were lined up in rows. Each monk had a narrow mattress and a strict curfew. Lights out meant no talking, no movement, no indulgence. And yet, even in these sacred spaces, temptation lingered. Confessions of midnight, sin of wandering hands, of forbidden dreams. They filled the margins of medieval manuscripts. Because even holy men dreamed. Even holy men stirred. But not all who shared beds were seekers of sin. Sometimes it was about survival. The medieval world was cold, bitterly so. Houses were poorly insulated, fires were hard to maintain, and winters were long. Sleeping alone meant freezing. 2 bodies meant shared heat. 3 meant even better odds. You layered yourself in cloaks curled tight as a snail and tucked your feet under the thighs of whoever was beside you. You didn't ask questions. You just needed to get through the night. And when illness came, as it often did, shared beds became even more dangerous. Plagues, poxes, fevers. A cough in the night might spread to everyone in the bed. And yet the sick weren't always isolated. There wasn't space. You nursed your child where they slept, held your spouse as they burned with fever, watched as your friend slipped away beside you. The bed was a place of infection, of care, of grief. You couldn't just replace the bedding. You couldn't always wash the sheets. Sometimes when someone died, you simply flipped the mattress and prayed. Death was a nightly visitor in medieval bedrooms, but so was life. Not the clean, polished kind, but the messy, whispered, fumbling, vulnerable kind. The kind that takes place when the candle's low and the rest of the world is sleeping. The kind that made people risk everything for a shared breath in the dark. Because to be in bed with another was to be human, to confess, to connect, to be known. You feel that now, don't you? That weight in the silence, that closeness, that strangeness. Someone's arm brushes yours. Someone turns in their sleep. The blankets shift, and the stories continue. The bed as battleground, as pulpit, as hiding place. Next time we'll slip into royal chambers, where seduction was political, and the bedroom could decide the fate of kingdoms. But for now, breathe deep, pull the covers close, and drift with me. We're not done yet. The mattress shifts again beneath you, not because you're moving, but because you're imagining something heavier now. Thicker sheets, velvet curtains drawn tight against a draft, a canopy overhead painted with golden stars or stitched with the family crest. The straw is gone, replaced by goose down. The smell is different too, less smoke, more rosewater. You're no longer in a peasant's cottage. You're in the bedchamber of a queen. But don't get too comfortable, because the royal bedroom, for all its silks and furs, was never a place of peace. It was a war room, a theater, a public gallery masked as private sanctuary. If you were born noble, especially royal, your bed was never your own, and your body even less so. Let's start with the most invasive tradition of all the royal bedding ceremony. When a king married, whether for love or alliance, their wedding night wasn't just a honeymoon. It was a duty, and it was witnessed, literally. The bedding ceremony varied by region and period, but the essentials remained the same. The newlyweds were led to bed with a full audience. Sometimes the entire court crowded the chamber. Sometimes only a few selected nobles. Either way, they were there to see the couple safely into bed. Yes, into it. Ladies undressed the bride, lords undressed the groom. They joked. They tossed coins. They gave marital advice they probably shouldn't have. And then they pulled the covers up and left the couple to perform their duty. Not everyone left. Sometimes a few courtiers remained sitting discreetly out of sight, waiting to confirm consummation, either through sound or, in more invasive cases, through physical evidence. Sheets were inspected for blood. If you're cringing now, you should be. But remember, this wasn't about love. This was about legitimacy. A royal marriage wasn't real until it was consummated. Why? Because of heirs. Everything hinged on children. If a marriage wasn't consummated, it could be annulled. If it produced no offspring, suspicion brewed. Was the wife barren? Was the husband incapable? Or had they simply never done the deed? The pressure was immense. The privacy non-existent. You might be lying there now in that great bed carved from oak, your breath tight in your chest, as the door finally clicks closed and silence returns, except for the murmurs outside, the shifting shadows of guards, the waiting world. There was no hiding in royal beds, and yet, some managed to try. Let's look at a woman like Isabella of France, wife of Edward VI of England. Their marriage was rocky, complicated by Edward's rumored male favorites and Isabella's growing political ambition. Eventually, she took a lover of her own, launched an invasion, and deposed her husband. It all started in the bedroom. Literally. Reports from the time claim that Edward preferred the company of his male courtiers in bed, ignoring Isabella, slighting her in public and private. And Isabella. She bided her time. She waited. She watched. And when she struck, she did so with the knowledge of the court behind her, because everyone already knew what went on or didn't between those royal sheets. Then there's Marguerite of Burgundy, married into the French royal line. Her adultery discovered after servants spotted secret night visits through bedroom windows triggered a scandal that rocked the monarchy. She was locked away, possibly suffocated with her own bedsheets. Beds could elevate a woman to queenship or reduce her to a prisoner. And for kings, their beds were often battlefield extensions. Henry VIII famously married 6 times, all in pursuit of a male heir. His beds were full, but his line remained cursed. Every bedroom failure became political gossip, every miscarriage a threat to the throne. His queen's bedrooms became stages for drama. Anne Boleyn's pregnancy announcements, Jane Seymour's fatal labor, Catherine Howard's alleged flirtations behind closed doors. When Anne was executed, Henry was already arranging the next bedding. And so the royal bed was not a resting place, it was a crucible. A royal child conceived in that bed meant a future, a lineage, a dynasty. And so there were rules. Royal women were watched during pregnancy, kept in confinement for weeks before birth, their rooms sealed. Only female attendants allowed. The birthing chamber became a hothouse of pressure curtains, drawn prayers, whispered the air thick with incense and sweat. Once the baby arrived, everyone needed proof. Midwives checked for signs. Was the child male, healthy, legitimate? Sometimes rumors flew that babies were swapped, especially if the mother had delivered stillborn. Could a royal child be smuggled in from elsewhere? Probably not. But the paranoia persisted, so everything had to be witnessed. A queen didn't even get to birth in private. Let's not forget the spies. Bedrooms were prime territory for espionage. Servants listened. Lovers betrayed. Letters were hidden beneath pillows. Even tapestries concealed peepholes. If you thought your royal chamber was secure, you were probably already compromised. And if a monarch had favorites, the tension doubled. Take Louis XIV of France. He often hosted intimate meetings in bed. Ministers of state waited outside while he conducted morning rituals, getting dressed, receiving petitions, flirting with mistresses. His bedchamber was as much a throne as any gilded chair. And his mistresses, they had their own bedrooms, but only those granted access to his chamber held true power. Beds were gatekeepers, of influence, of inheritance, of survival. And when kings died, their bedrooms became sacred. Courtiers gathered. Priests arrived. The dying monarch lay under heavy blankets, surrounded by candlelight and holy relics. Last words were whispered. Wills read. And when the king's breath stopped, the room erupted into chaos. Servants looted, nobles jockeyed for position, and somewhere nearby, the next ruler was being ushered into their own freshly made bed. The circle began again. You feel the weight of it now, don't you? That canopy above your head isn't just fabric, it's power. That bedpost carved with angels is a witness. The sheets beneath you once carried blood and sweat and tears of people who ruled the world by night and lost it by morning. You close your eyes, but not to sleep, to listen, to remember. Because even in sleep, in the grandest rooms of history, nothing stayed quiet for long. It's still dark, but a different kind of darkness now. Not the velvet hush of royalty or the cloistered silence of noble confinement. This is the damp, close-pressed blackness of the monastic cell. The fire doesn't crackle here. The air is colder, cleaner, harsher. You're lying on a narrow-cot wooden slats beneath a thin straw mattress. Your head rests on a folded habit, and your blanket is coarse, unyielding. Outside your door, if you have one, is a long stone corridor. Silent. Except for the tolling of a bell somewhere in the distance, calling souls to prayer. This is no ordinary bedroom. It's a spiritual battlefield. Welcome to the bedroom of a monk, or a nun. Or perhaps something in between. Let's begin with how monks slept and why their bedrooms were never really about sleep. Most medieval monasteries didn't offer private chambers. Instead, monks slept in a dormitory, a long open hall lined with rows of narrow beds or pallets. There was no privacy, no personal space, and no room for indulgence. The Rule of Saint Benedict, one of the foundational texts for Western monastic life, laid out strict instructions, sleep clothed on a simple bed, with the lights dim but never extinguished. Rise at the sound of the bell. Pray in the night. Resist temptation. Because even in dreams, sin could creep in. To guard against it, some monks tied belts or cords around their waists, before sleep, physical reminders of chastity. Others prayed specific psalms to guard against impure thoughts. You were encouraged to sleep on your back arms, crossed as if already laid out in death. Humble, watchful, pure. But it wasn't easy. The night was long. The body, despite everything, still stirred. And the mind, oh, the mind wandered. If a monk succumbed to desire through thought or deed, it was a serious offense. Punishable, confessable, documented in tiny, ashamed script in the margins of monastery records. The sin of the bedroom was not just physical, it was spiritual, a test of the soul, and not just for men. Nunneries, too, had their share of sleepless nights. Contrary to common belief, many medieval nuns were not isolated innocents. Some entered convents willingly drawn to a life of discipline and learning. Others were forced in daughters too expensive to marry off women whose families sought favor with the church. For them, the bedroom was not a sanctuary. It was a cage. Nuns shared cells or at best curtained alcoves. They rose in the night for vigils, trudged barefoot through cold cloisters, and returned to bed only to lie stiffly beneath threadbare blankets, ears tuned to every creak of the stone walls. But secrets lingered here too. Not all convents were pious. Scandals rippled through history of abbesses who bore children of nuns who fled with lovers of seductions, carried out in candlelit corners of dormitories. Some convents became havens for noble women who refused marriage places where freedom bloomed in whispered conversations after dark. One infamous case involved Joanna of Valois, who became a nun only to later found her own order reforming convent life to be stricter, more controlled. Her inspiration, the decadence and laxity she'd witnessed in supposedly holy bedrooms. But even beyond monasteries and convents, bedroom rituals were deeply spiritual. Ordinary laypeople, peasants, merchants, midwives often slept with rosaries under their pillows. Some placed crosses above the bed or painted saints onto the bedposts. The belief was simple: the bed was where the soul was most vulnerable. Demons could visit. Temptation could enter. Sleep itself was a little death, and so protection was needed. It wasn't unusual to say a full set of prayers before lying down, or to wake at midnight to murmur verses from the Psalms. The Virgin Mary was a common figure to invoke gentle maternal watchful. She guarded children from night terrors, shielded mothers during childbirth, and kept the devil away from dreamers. And yet, despite all these safeguards, the night remained dangerous, especially for women. Because a woman's bed wasn't always hers, and her body least of all. Let's step away from the nunnery now, out of the cloister, into the city, into a brothel. Because not all beds were sacred. Some were transactional. And while medieval Europe had a complicated relationship with sex, it rarely pretended it didn't exist. Prostitution was legal in many towns, regulated, taxed, even protected. And where it was legal, brothels flourished. The bedrooms inside these brothels were small, often upstairs. The beds were functional, not luxurious straw mattresses, thin linens, maybe a faded tapestry on the wall. But the women who worked there often made them beautiful. Flowers on the windowsill, candles burning low, perfumed water in clay bowls to wash between clients. They were women with stories. Some had been sold into the work. Others had chosen it, seeing no better path. A few became madams, powerful, wealthy, sometimes respected. And their beds were strange, liminal places where affection was sold, but also sometimes found. Clients came not just for sex, but for comfort, for sleep, for someone to hold them in the dark, for a whispered confession. In some towns, visiting a brothel was considered safer morally and physically than seducing an honest woman. Better to sin openly than destroy a maiden's honor. The church didn't endorse prostitution, but many clerics turned a blind eye. After all, even saints had slept with sinners, and some of those sinners became saints. There are tales, half true, half legend, of repentant courtesans who left their beds behind and joined the cloister, of kings who fell in love with working girls and elevated them to court, of bedrooms that transformed from dens of sin to cradles of redemption. Because in the medieval mind, the bedroom was always in flux. Holy one moment, profane the next. A place of prayer, a place of pleasure, a place of penance. You're lying there now, caught between all three. The candle flickers. Somewhere a bell tolls the hour. A footstep echoes in the corridor outside your door. You pull the blanket to your chin. Because you know, whatever your station, your gender, your vow, sleeping in the Middle Ages was never just sleeping. It was watching, waiting, wanting, and trying somehow to make it to morning. You haven't moved in a while. Your body's heavy, your mind floating somewhere between then and now, between that cold convent cell and the upstairs room in a brothel where someone once whispered a lullaby they didn't mean. But we're still in the bedroom. And tonight, we're going to talk about the bed as a place of secrets and survival. Because medieval bedrooms weren't just for rest or ritual. They were for hiding things, people, objects, thoughts too dangerous to say aloud. Let's begin with hidden compartments. If you were wealthy enough to own furniture, real furniture, not just crates and sacks, your bed frame might contain a built-in chest, not just for linens, but for letters, locks of hair, a dagger, a vial of poison, something sacred, something shameful, something you hoped no one else would find. In some cases, the mattress itself could be lifted to reveal a hollowed base, or a loose floorboard beneath the bed offered a secret stash. People hid valuables here during times of war or when the tax collector came knocking. You never knew who might ransack a home in the dead of night. Soldiers, thieves, even neighbors. The bedroom was your last defense, but it was also a place where emotions were buried. Grief. Especially grief. If you lost a child, and many did, the bed became the only place left where their memory lingered. The place they were born, the place they nursed, the place they died. You might not remove their little cot from the corner. You might keep the blanket they last used folded neatly at the foot of your own bed. You might whisper their name in the middle of the night, long after the rest of the household had forgotten. There were no grief counselors, no support groups, only pillows to muffle the sound of mourning, and no one knew how to grieve in silence better than widows. When a husband died, the widow's bed became both tomb and prison. She might be expected to wear black for the rest of her life, to retreat from society, to refuse the pleasures of remarriage. Some chose this path willingly. Others were forced. If she was childless, she might lose her home, especially if it came from her husband's side. His male relatives could inherit everything. And her bedroom, it might no longer be hers. Some widows were placed into religious orders turned into living ghosts, who drifted through convent dormitories with veils pulled low and eyes that never met yours. Others remained in the home, sleeping in the same bed where their husband had died, saying nightly prayers for a soul they weren't sure had gone to heaven. And some, in the privacy of their bed, chose to resist it all. There are letters from women in the 14th and 15th centuries, widows who refused to remarry, who managed their own estates, who kept lovers who slept alone by choice. They took control of the bed, not because it was given to them, but because it was the only space that could be theirs. For a few hours, behind a locked door. And then, of course, there were the women who never had that choice to begin with. Let's talk about servants. A maid in a noble house might sleep in the same chamber as her mistress, or just outside it on a bench or the floor, ready to be summoned. Some slept beside children they nursed, wrapped in cloaks, always within reach. They had no bed of their own, no room, no space that was just theirs. And sometimes they were pulled into someone else's bed entirely, because the power dynamics of a medieval household were steep. A lord could summon a servant girl in the night, and no one would dare question it. A noblewoman might demand a stable boy's presence, and servants would turn their faces away. Consent in these bedrooms was murky, sometimes impossible. And afterward, there were no consequences for the powerful, only whispers. Pregnancies dismissed, reputations ruined. A girl might be sent away. A boy might vanish. The bed told no one. The blankets swallowed the secret. Still, people found ways to fight back or hide. There are records of servant girls who tied belts around their waists at night, made from rosary cords or knotted rope to deter unwanted advances. Others shared beds in pairs for protection. They whispered warnings through the dark. Don't fall asleep with your back turned, or if the door opens, pretend you're sick. Sometimes they slept with shoes still on, ready to run. And when they couldn't run, they prayed. To Saint Margaret, patron of childbirth. To Saint Zita, patron of domestic workers. To the Virgin herself, who understood what it meant to be alone in the dark, waiting. But not every story from the bedroom was tragic, because even in the bleakest spaces, people found intimacy, love, the kind that had to be hidden, the kind that existed only between the sheets when the world was asleep. There were same-sex relationships carefully tucked away in corners of dormitories and noble bedchambers, between pages of letters, beneath shared quilts. Monks who lingered too long beside one another, ladies in waiting who shared more than gossip. We don't have many records because love like that had to be burned, buried, or carefully coded, but sometimes it slipped through. Poetry written in the margins of psalters, a pair of names scratched beneath a bed frame, two female saints laid to rest together in the same tomb. We don't know all the stories, but we know the bed carried them, held them, and kept them warm. You can feel that now. The hush of a secret kept under layers of linen, the ache of a touch remembered only by the mattress, the echo of breath held between two people who could not say each other's names aloud. There's tenderness here. There always was, even among the straw and cold stone, even among lice and ash, because the bedroom wasn't just a place of pain. It was also the last place you could be real, and that's what people did. They grieved here, they loved here, they plotted here, and when the time came, they died here. But not quite yet. We're still in the thick of the night. The candle is still burning, so pull the blanket higher, let the mattress sag, and listen. There's more the bed wants to show you. The night feels heavier now. You've been here long enough to sense the shift that moment when the hush changes from drowsy to eternal. The candle's wick stutters. The embers are ash. You can feel it in your chest, in the way your breath settles and your limbs go still. Because now the medieval bedroom becomes a place of death, and not in the dramatic battlefield sense, not with swords and glory. No, this death is quiet, private, slow, and deeply, deeply human. Most people in the Middle Ages died where they slept, not in hospitals, not in sterile rooms, but in beds they'd spent their whole lives in, sometimes the same one they were born in, surrounded by the same walls, the same worn beams, the same sounds, the same smells. Death wasn't separate from life. It was life's last ritual. And the bedroom. It was the altar. Imagine it now, you're lying under a stack of wool blankets. Your older bones, thin breath shallow. Your fingers clutch a rosary or a wooden cross worn smooth by years of prayer. The windows are shuttered. The room is warm but still. Someone's keeping the fire going. Someone's whispering a psalm. And around the bed, family, neighbors, a priest. They're watching for signs, the rattle in the throat, the flicker of the eyes the moment your hand falls slack. Because the deathbed vigil was sacred. People weren't meant to die alone. If they could help it, they died with witnesses. Those witnesses prayed for the soul, comforted the body, and made sure the last rites were performed before it was too late. Extreme unction. That was the final sacrament, the anointing of the sick. The priest would arrive robed slightly askew from rushing holy oil in hand. He'd touch your forehead, your lips, your chest, whisper absolution, cross you with oil and words sanctifying every inch that had sinned. If you could speak, you confessed. If you couldn't, the prayers covered what your voice no longer could. Because it wasn't just about dying, it was about dying well. Medieval Christians were obsessed with the idea of the good death. To die unshriven, unrepentant, or unaware that was to risk eternal damnation. So the bedroom became a theater of preparation. Last words mattered. So did gestures, glances, even the way you breathed. Some people rehearsed their deaths, practiced their final confessions, memorized prayers to whisper in case the priest didn't arrive in time, kept a crucifix at the bedside at all times, just in case. And when the moment came, the room changed. The air thickened. Someone opened a window so the soul could fly free. Candles were lit. Bells rang. Sheets were drawn up. And afterward, the body stayed right where it was, for a while, because the next ritual was one of watching. The body lay in bed as visitors came to pay respects. The same bed where you had slept, laughed, argued, dreamt, was now your bier. People wept. Some touched your hands. Children were brought in to learn the lesson early. This is how it ends. And in a strange way, the bedroom offered comfort. You weren't in some faraway field. You weren't alone on a cold floor. You were home, in your space, in your sheets, surrounded by everything you'd built. But this wasn't just a peasant's ritual. Kings died this way too. Let's return briefly to the palace chamber. Take King Henry I of England. He died in Normandy after eating a surfeit of lampreys, a royal indulgence that became his undoing. He was moved to bed where attendants swarmed. Doctors bled him. Priests prayed. And when it was clear death was inevitable, he received last rites. What followed was chaos. His body lay in bed for days. The weather was warm. His flesh bloated. His chamber filled with the stench of royal decay. Servants fainted. The court panicked. But still, his deathbed was honored, witnessed, marked as sacred. In contrast, Edward the Confessor, a saint king, reportedly died peacefully, in bed, eyes fixed on the heavens, surrounded by monks chanting in Latin. His bedroom became a shrine, the bed a relic. Pilgrims came to see the room where he passed, because to die well made you holy. But what if you couldn't die in your bed? What if death came too suddenly? That was the true fear. To collapse in a field, to be murdered on the road, to be struck by lightning in a storm. That meant no priest, no rites, no comfort, no time to say goodbye. People begged God for one more night, to return home, to reach their bed, to die with feet pointed east as tradition held facing Jerusalem, to have eyes closed by a loved one, to be wrapped in a winding sheet laid out neatly on the mattress, to rest in linen one last time before the grave. Beds became stand-ins for coffins, and coffins, if you had one, became echoes of beds. Wood lined with cloth hands crossed over the chest. But there's something else that lingered in medieval bedrooms. Ghosts. Oh yes, death didn't end the bedroom story. Many believed that spirits haunted the beds they died in, that their restless souls remained in the chamber, especially if death had been violent. People hung charms above the bed to keep ghosts at bay, painted sacred symbols on bedposts, slept with relics beneath pillows. If someone died in a bed, it might be moved, burned, or never used again, unless you had no choice. Then you just prayed harder and kept the candle lit. Sometimes the dying left wills from their beds, whispered to scribes, dictated to priests, property divided, debts settled, secrets finally spoken. Who gets the family spoon, the pig, the bed itself? Yes, even the bed was inherited, passed down, reused, slept in by a new body with no idea of who had last breathed their final breath on the same straw. You might be in that bed now. The mattress remembers. So do the sheets if they're the same. You close your eyes. You breathe slow. And you wonder just for a moment how many others have lain exactly as you are now. Hands on stomach, blanket up to chin, ears full of the night's hush, waiting. Not just for sleep, but for whatever comes next. The light is just beginning to change. Not dawn. Not yet. But the deepest dark is retreating. You can almost hear the morning birds warming their throats beyond the shuttered windows. Your body's stiff. The bed's still cold. And somewhere outside your door, footsteps are beginning. It's time to rise. But not fast, not yet. Because even waking up in the medieval world was its own strange ritual, and the act of getting out of bed more complex than you'd think. First, you had to untangle yourself from the nest, because medieval people didn't toss off duvets and leap into slippers. They peeled back layers, literally. There were scratchy wool blankets, maybe a fur or two on top if you were rich, followed by the undersheet, and beneath that, the cords holding the mattress together. And if your bed had curtains, those needed to be pulled aside gently, one by one. These weren't just decorative. Bed curtains kept in warmth, kept out bugs, and kept your secrets secret. Then came the clothing situation. If you were wealthy, you didn't dress yourself. A servant arrived already washed and dressed hours before to help you pull on stockings, hose undershirts, doublets, girdles, laces, pins, wool. If you were poor, you dressed in yesterday's tunic, possibly while still half wrapped in a blanket. And if you were in a communal space, you might do all this while pretending not to notice the person next to you doing the same. There was no such thing as morning privacy. But here's where it gets stranger. People didn't necessarily wake up all at once, because in the Middle Ages, sleep was segmented. You'll remember this from before. People often followed a pattern of first sleep and second sleep. They'd go to bed shortly after dusk, sleep for a few hours, then wake naturally in the middle of the night, sometime between 10 and 2 a.m. They might pray, talk, tend the fire, write if they were literate, even visit a neighbor. Then they'd return to bed for their second sleep, waking again at dawn. This watch period was a kind of twilight zone, a time when dreams clung close to waking thoughts, when problems felt clearer, ideas brighter, and sometimes temptation slipped in. Doctors of the day wrote about it. So did poets. The idea of two sleeps was just accepted. You might be lying there now in the watch, staring up at the dark wood canopy above you. The person beside you breathes softly. You don't move, but your mind runs. What did you dream? Dreams mattered here. In medieval culture, dreams weren't just nighttime nonsense. They were messages from God, from the devil, from your own soul, or from the dead. There were entire books, dream manuals that helped you interpret them. Dream of teeth falling out, a death in the family. Dream of fire betrayal, water rebirth, or danger. Noblemen consulted astrologers about dreams. Monks recorded them in journals. Peasants might wake up terrified after seeing a demon in the night and rush to a priest for protection. And sometimes dreams were believed to reveal truths you couldn't admit while awake. Suspect your spouse is unfaithful. Dream of a broken bed. Worried about a sick child. Dream of cradling a bundle that slips from your hands. The bed wasn't just where dreams happened, it was the source of them. And not just dreams. Nightmares. Oh, and medieval people had a word for those too. The Mara, a supernatural being, sometimes a spirit, sometimes a witch, sometimes a demon that would sit on your chest while you slept. Suffocate you, paralyze you, whisper in your ear. You couldn't scream, couldn't move. Just lie there trapped in the half-light until morning broke the spell. We know it now as sleep paralysis, but to them it was very real. Some people scattered salt around their bed at night to ward off the Mara. Others placed iron under the pillow. Still others kept a knife hidden in the sheets, not for protection from people, but from whatever visited them in sleep. And if you think this was superstition limited to peasants, think again. Even kings had nightmares. Even bishops trembled at the sound of footsteps that weren't there. Because when the fire went out, when the candle flickered and died, everyone was equal in the dark. And then came morning. The bell rang in the monastery. The rooster crowed in the village. The maid knocked softly on the noblewoman's chamber door. Children stirred in the hay. Men groaned and pulled on boots with cold fingers. And the bed once so important was suddenly forgotten. Blankets were folded. Beds restuffed. In some homes, the mattress was lifted to check for bugs or lice. The room swept. The chamber pot emptied. And life resumed. But before they left, many people said a prayer. The waking prayer. A whispered thanks for surviving the night. A plea for strength through the day. A request that should they not return to the bed that night, their soul be taken gently, because the bed might forget you, but the heavens would not. You stretch now just a little. Your bones ache from stillness. Your feet are cold. The room is quiet, but no longer silent. You can almost hear the distant clatter of pots, the bleating of a goat, someone laughing outside. But you don't need to rise. Not yet. Because the next time you close your eyes, we'll explore what it meant to sleep with power when the bed was less a place to rest and more a tool to control, manipulate, and conquer. For now, pull the covers tight. We're not leaving the bed just yet. You're lying still now, barely breathing. But not from fear, from focus. Because in this part of the night, when shadows are deepest and the candle is almost out, the bed transforms once again, from cradle to battlefield, from sanctuary to weapon. Because in the medieval world, the bedroom was often a seat of power, and the bed was the throne. Let's go back to the court, the palace, the heavy stone keep. The walls are thick. The air carries the scent of dried herbs and wood smoke. You're in a chamber larger than most cottages, with arched ceilings and embroidered hangings. But you're not alone. Because in this bed, what's happening isn't sleep. It's politics. The royal bed, especially the king's, was where real power moved. To be invited into that bed, literally or figuratively, was to be admitted to influence. And that influence wasn't always sexual. Take Edward II of England, for example. His close companions, particularly Piers Gaveston and later Hugh Despenser, wielded extraordinary power not just because of whispered affections, but because of access. Being allowed into the king's chamber, into his most private space, meant you had his ear, and often his loyalty. Noble families fought for that kind of access. To have a daughter selected as a lady of the bedchamber. That wasn't just flattery, it was positioning. Proximity meant possibility. Secrets, influence. A mistress who shared the king's bed might sway court decisions, secure land for her family, influence foreign policy. The bed became the council room behind the council room. And the queen. Her bed, too, was watched carefully. Because producing an heir wasn't just a personal goal, it was national duty. Every step of her fertility was monitored, from her menstrual cycles to her cravings. If she was late, everyone knew. If she seemed sick in the mornings, women whispered. When she finally conceived, her bedroom became a sacred chamber, guarded, sealed, filled with midwives and attendants. And if she failed, well, there were always others waiting, sometimes literal others. Royal mistresses weren't hidden in towers. They had their own chambers, their own courtiers, their own soft beds where power passed from skin to skin, breath to breath. Some were deeply loved, others tools of manipulation, and some both. But it wasn't only kings who used the bed to dominate. Noblewomen, too, played the game. Take Isabeau of Bavaria, Queen of France, rumored to have tangled alliances, political bedfellows, and a deep understanding of how influence moved beneath the sheets. Whether the gossip was true or not hardly mattered. What mattered was that the bed was a space where she was seen to operate, and that gave her power. Other women unable to wield swords or hold office found that their only influence came from the private sphere. A whispered word in bed, a promise, a threat. Because the bedroom was where people let down their guard. And in a world of alliances and betrayals, that was a valuable thing. Even outside the court, the bed had social leverage. In households, marriages weren't always about love. They were about land, dowries, inheritance. The marriage bed was a symbol, a legal one. A bed shared meant a contract sealed. Children born in it became proof of the deal. But that meant the bed could be contested. There were cases where a marriage was annulled because the couple failed to consummate it. If a bride could prove her husband couldn't perform his duty, she might be granted freedom. But proving it meant tests, examinations, public shame. One medieval man accused of impotence was ordered to demonstrate arousal before a panel of clergy. He failed. His marriage was annulled. The bed had rules, and failure in it had consequences. There were also bedroom spies, servants who listened, lovers who reported, visitors who noted who entered and when they left. In royal courts, there was no such thing as a private bedroom. Every motion was monitored, and sometimes people used the bed to trap. Imagine this: a nobleman invites a rival to dine, plies him with wine, offers him a guest room for the night. The mattress is clean. The fire burns low. The servant leaves quietly. Then, as the rival sleeps unguarded, perhaps snoring gently, he is arrested, dragged from the bed where he thought he was safe. Because to accept someone's hospitality, to sleep beneath their roof, was to be vulnerable, and the bed was the most vulnerable place of all. But people fought back. Women especially learned to wield their own power in the bedroom. A clever noblewoman might delay a husband's advances for political reasons, pretend illness, use her monthly bleeding as a barrier, or offer affection in exchange for land promises leniency for a brother. And servants, too, found ways to bargain. Some used intimacy to rise mistresses who later became wives. Others kept secrets, leveraged their silence for protection payment or influence. Because the bed remembered everything. It was where you were most exposed and most dangerous. A single pillow could smother. A whispered word could destroy. A night of passion could change dynasties. People feared the sword, but they respected the bed. Because you could be killed in the throne room, but you were undone in the bedroom. And if you were smart, you used it before it was used against you. Even now, lying in your own bed centuries away, you can feel the weight of it, the heaviness of tapestries, the heat of breath on your neck, the flicker of a gaze from across silk-covered pillows. Are they friend or foe? You close your eyes, just for a moment. Because next we'll visit the one room where the bedroom's power became ritualized theater, where the bed was both prop and prophecy. The wedding night. But for now, rest. We're not done yet. You're standing now, not in the bed, but just beside it. The room is filled with people. Nobles, clergy, attendants, musicians. They're not whispering. They're laughing, drinking, winking. The mood is festive, but it pulses with something else, too. Expectation. All eyes are on the bed. Because this isn't just any night. It's your wedding night. And everyone's waiting to watch. Not all the way, of course, though, sometimes nearly. Because in many medieval cultures, consummation wasn't private. It was a formal ceremony, a public contract. The final step that made your marriage real in the eyes of the church, the court, and the family. It was called the bedding ceremony. After the wedding feast, the bride and groom were escorted to their chamber with pomp and teasing. Guests sometimes carried them. Sometimes the bridal party undressed the newlyweds, laughing, tossing shoes, giving bawdy advice. Musicians might play. Poems might be read aloud, sometimes lewd ones passed down through generations. In some traditions, a priest blessed the bed before anyone climbed in. In others, the lord of the manor might toss coins onto the mattress, a fertility charm meant to ensure offspring. Guests would linger just long enough to see the couple tucked in, then withdraw behind closed doors. But not always all the way, because sometimes people stayed behind to witness. In noble houses, a close attendant or multiple might linger behind a curtain. They didn't have to see the act, just confirm that it happened. And if they couldn't, well, the couple might be asked to submit evidence the next day. A blood-stained sheet, a cloth, a physical token of purity exchanged for legitimacy. Yes, it was invasive, awkward, unnerving. But it was expected, because a marriage without consummation could be annulled. So young couples, many just teenagers, lay in strange beds under heavy sheets with the echoes of footsteps still fading outside the door, and tried to carry out their legal obligation. Some were too frightened. Some didn't understand what to do. Some were coached, coaxed, guided, and sometimes coerced. The idea of sexual consent as we understand it today did not fully exist in most medieval cultures. Once married, the husband had complete conjugal rights. The wife could not refuse without punishment, physical, legal, or social. and so many brides approached the marriage bed with dread. Even more so if the groom was significantly older or a stranger altogether. Many marriages were arranged with little input from the couple. The bed was where they became not just husband and wife, but property and owner. Of course, not all wedding nights were horror shows. There were soft ones. Ones where both bride and groom were nervous but kind. Where they whispered, laughed, took time. Some grew to love each other in the dark after all the rituals were done. But the bed was never neutral, even if it had rose petals, even if it had ribbons, because it was weighed down by all the eyes that had just watched you walk toward it. Now imagine the next morning. You rise with the sun blinking, your hair still tangled with sleep. The room smells of candles, sweat, and wine. A servant knocks, then enters without waiting. She pulls back the covers, lifts the sheet checks for stains. If there's blood, she nods, says nothing, and disappears. If there isn't. You may have to explain. Maybe it'll be excused. Maybe the bedding was done too gently. Maybe the bride had no veil to break. But maybe, just maybe, people will talk. And talking leads to scandal, especially if you're a noblewoman, especially if an heir needs to be produced. You feel that pressure now, don't you, lying back in the same bed, your body stiff from ritual, your mind still spinning with ceremony. The room feels different than it did yesterday. Not yours, never was. It belongs to expectation now. Because from the moment you enter it, the marriage bed becomes a measuring stick. And it doesn't stop with consummation. Every month, someone asks after your womb. If you're pale, they whisper pregnancy. If you're flushed, they whisper failure. Midwives are summoned. Herbs are given. Prayers said. The bed becomes a laboratory, a medical theater, a place to check again and again whether the marriage is bearing fruit. And if it doesn't, there are consequences. A queen who cannot produce an heir may be cast aside. A noblewoman may be divorced. A merchant's wife might be replaced. Always with justification, she was barren. She was cold. She was cursed. The bed records it all. It becomes both witness and judge. And when a child is conceived, the rituals begin again. A pregnant woman might remain in the bedroom for weeks before giving birth. The room is purified. Candles are lit. Relics are brought in. She is not allowed out until after the child is born baptized and the churching rite is complete. Even then, she may not return to the marriage bed right away, because birth changes everything, not just the woman, but the bedroom itself. Now it's a nursery, a sick room, a place where the mother recovers, where the wet nurse takes over, where visitors come to touch the baby and comment on its resemblance to the father. But no one asks how the bed feels now, or whether she sleeps at all. You might be lying there with her now, one hand on her stomach, one hand on the tiny bundle beside her. Eyes fixed on the carved canopy above, wondering if the next child will live, if the midwife will come in time, if the blood will stop, or if the bed will claim her too. You breathe in, the air is thicker now, not because of dust, but because the bed remembers everything. The footsteps, the linens, the looks, the weight of duty carried out under silk sheets and heavy eyes. But don't rise yet, because next time we'll strip all the finery away and look at what the ordinary medieval person did in their bed, when no one was watching, when no one cared, what real passion looked like, what real sleep felt like. We're almost there. But for now, keep still. Let the night linger. Let the candle burn low. Now the candles are out. The feasting is over. The songs have faded. The noble beds have been left behind, too stiff, too ceremonial, too far from the kind of sleep you know. Now you're in a different room. No tapestries on the walls. No velvet sheets. No witnesses waiting outside the door. This bed creaks when you move. It smells like the animals outside the door, like hay and smoke and unwashed feet. The mattress sags. The coverlet is patched. The floor beneath you is hard-packed earth scattered with straw. This is the bedroom of a regular person, a laborer, a washerwoman, a weaver, a blacksmith's daughter. And what happened in here at night? Everything and nothing. There was no privacy, no space to hide. If you shared a home, and you did, you shared a bed. With your spouse, your child, your cousin, your elderly parent, sometimes even your apprentice. Still, people made room for intimacy, and not always quietly. The medieval world didn't have soundproofing, and modesty was flexible. If the baby was asleep, if the neighbor was gone, if the mood struck, people found time. There was no concept of a bedroom as we know it. It was a space, a function, a box with blankets in it. So love happened where it could, sometimes quickly, sometimes quietly. Sometimes after years of silence between husband and wife, when a shared glance at the fire rekindled something familiar. Sometimes in secret. Not all beds were marital. Not all lovers were allowed. And sometimes people took what they wanted, which meant that the bed could be a site of violence too. Peasant women were vulnerable, especially to traveling knights, tax collectors, landlords. The social imbalance meant that no was often ignored, and when it happened in the dark, when a woman was sleeping, and someone came into the room, there was little she could do, little recourse, little justice. Just bruises, and the bed remembered. But amid the danger, tenderness survived. There are letters, scraps of them written by ordinary men to their wives. Soldiers at war, farmers away on business. I miss your warmth, one writes. I dreamt of lying beside you, another says. These weren't poets, just people who knew that at the end of a long day, the best thing in the world was the body you loved, curled beside you in the dark. Sex wasn't shameful in the medieval world, not in the way we think. It was controlled, supervised, church-regulated. But it wasn't always hidden. Husbands and wives were encouraged to engage, so long as it was for procreation. There were even manuals written by monks describing appropriate positions and forbidden acts. Too much pleasure was frowned upon. Anything unnatural was sinful. But sex itself expected, necessary. And in practice, people did as people do. They made love for connection, for comfort, for relief. They giggled, they groaned. They whispered things in the dark that no priest would approve of. And then they slept. Real sleep. The kind that comes after hard work and full bellies and full hearts. But even sleep had its hazards. Fires for one. Homes were heated by hearths. Beds were warmed with stones taken from the fire and wrapped in cloth. But sparks flew. Blankets caught. Many a cottage burned to the ground while a family slept. So people were cautious. They banked the fire. They kept a bucket of water nearby if they had one. They said a prayer. And then they lay down together. Not on memory foam. Not on sprung coils. just straw, or feathers, or if money was tight sacks stuffed with dried grass. In winter they piled in close. Parents, children, aunts, cousins. You didn't always get your own blanket. You curled like spoons, back to belly, a chain of heat in a freezing room. You didn't complain about snoring or elbows. You were just grateful to be warm. And when someone died, the bed shifted again. In poor households, there was only one bed. If someone passed in it, you slept beside them until the body could be taken away. And then you flipped the mattress, laid a sprig of rosemary beneath the pillow, and slept again. Because life had to continue. The bed, like the people in it, endured, and even joy had its place. Some nights when no one was sick, when the harvest was good, when the air didn't bite through your clothes, someone told a story, a silly one, or sang a soft song, and the children giggled under the blankets, and the mother smiled, and the father hummed a tune, and the whole house wrapped in furs, and love and smoke drifted off. This wasn't the world of palaces or saints. This was the real medieval bedroom. It was messy. It was loud. It was beautiful. And tonight you lie in it, not as a king, not as a servant, just as yourself. Hearing the dogs bark outside, smelling the stew that never quite left the air, feeling the weight of someone's legs against yours, knowing that despite the cold and the lice and the thin walls you're home, the candles burn down, the stars are bright, and someone beside you is already snoring. So pull the blanket higher. You'll sleep soon. But first we'll explore what people believed happened while they slept, the myths, the monsters, the visitations. Because in the dark, not every touch was human. You're still awake. Or maybe you're not. Maybe you've drifted into that strange in-between place where your eyes are closed but your mind is wide open. The fire's gone out. The house is silent. But something's shifted. You feel it, don't you? Something is in the room. Welcome to the world of medieval sleep superstitions. Because for all their rituals and prayers and routines, medieval people did not entirely trust the night, or the bed, or what might come while they slept. Let's begin with the Mara, the creature you met briefly before. She was feared across northern and eastern Europe. A shadow woman, a pressure on the chest, a paralysis of breath. People believed the Mara would come in the night and sit on your rib cage, suffocating you, stealing your energy, twisting your dreams into nightmares. You might call it sleep paralysis. They called it demonic. To protect themselves, people tied iron scissors beneath the bed, left broomsticks at the foot so spirits would have to count the bristles before reaching the sleeper. Others recited charms, whispered into pillows, or left garlic near the mattress. Because the bedroom wasn't just vulnerable to sickness or scandal. It was vulnerable to magic. In some parts of Europe, it was believed that a jealous neighbor or even a family member could cast a sleeping spell on you. You'd lie down like normal, only to wake hours later, drained, restless, or cursed. Some claimed this was the work of witches. Others blamed fae folk. Others just didn't talk about it at all. And dreams, they weren't innocent. People believed dreams were visitations, sometimes from the divine, often from the damned. To dream of wolves was a bad omen. To dream of floodwaters meant betrayal. To dream of a burning bed, death in the family. There were books, carefully illustrated manuscripts, passed from hand to hand, that claimed to decode the language of dreams. One nobleman supposedly refused to sleep on his left side for years, after a dream predicted he would die if he did. When he finally forgot the warning and rolled over in his sleep, he never woke again. Coincidence, maybe. But medieval people didn't believe in coincidence. They believed in omens, and the bedroom was full of them. Take sleepwalking, for example. We know it as a medical condition, but in the Middle Ages, it was a spiritual danger. A sleepwalker was seen as someone who had lost part of their soul, temporarily stolen by a demon or pulled towards something forbidden. If someone walked at night, they were restrained, sometimes even tied to the bed with cords soaked in holy water. It was better to be safe. And then there were the dead. Oh yes. People believed the dead could return to the bedroom, especially if they had unfinished business, a promise unkept, a sin unconfessed, a child left uncared for. They'd come back not as ghosts in sheets, but as shadows, whispers, cold drafts, a weight on the edge of the bed. You'd wake to see nothing there, but you'd know, and if the person had died in the same bed you now occupied, that was even worse. It was common practice to leave a candle burning through the first 3 nights after someone's death to light their way to the afterlife. And if that candle blew out suddenly, people believed the soul was stuck. Some refused to sleep in beds where someone had died. Others had no choice. So they added protection prayers to their nighttime routines. They traced a cross on the pillow, placed a pinch of salt beneath the sheets, asked Saint Michael to guard their dreams, or laid a crucifix against the mattress to keep spirits from crawling up through the floor. But the most feared visitor of all, the incubus, a demonic entity said to prey on women in their sleep. Unlike the Mara, the incubus wasn't just a pressure on the chest. It was a seducer, a violator, a being who stole not just breath but purity. Women who woke feeling bruised, afraid, or altered were sometimes said to have been visited. And if they were pregnant, well, the church had answers for that too. Not every child born of unknown fatherhood was blamed on servants or lovers. Some were blamed on demons. It became a way to explain the unexplainable, to preserve reputations, to wrap trauma in supernatural silk. But the stories weren't always about punishment. Some tales told of angels appearing in dreams, offering comfort, warnings, light. Saints were said to come to the faithful in their beds, laying hands upon them, curing fevers, whispering truths. A vision in sleep could change your life, could make you holy. So you see, for the medieval mind, the bed wasn't just for sleep. It was a threshold between waking and dreaming, between flesh and spirit, between life and death. You might feel it even now, that sense that the room is not entirely yours, that there are things just outside your sight, the edge of the curtain, the creak in the floorboard, the breeze where there should be none. But don't worry. The candle at your bedside is still lit, and you've said your prayers. Or maybe I've said them for you, because belief, after all, was the best defense, even if it couldn't keep the wind out, or the dreams away. Now hush. We're almost done. But next, we'll step beyond the bedroom door and ask what it meant to be seen there. What your bed said about your status, your soul, and your secrets. Close your eyes. Not too tight. The night isn't finished with you yet. You stir just a little. You're still in bed, still wrapped in layers of linen and wool, still listening to the soft scratch of wind against the shutters. But now the silence has shifted again. Because tonight, we're not just looking at what happened in the bed. We're asking, what did the bed say about you? Because in the medieval world, your bed wasn't just where you slept. It was a statement, a symbol, a social marker. Let's begin with the obvious. How big was your bed? The size of your bed told others your wealth, your status, your power. If you had a single straw mattress, you were poor. Probably slept on the floor, maybe next to a sibling or a goat. If you had a raised wooden frame, you were better off, though it still creaked and still sagged and still played host to lice and fleas. But if you had a four-poster bed with curtains, carvings, embroidered linens, and even steps to climb into it, then people knew you mattered. A noble's bed could be seen from across the room, a towering thing with a canopy like a crown. Often it was the single most expensive piece of furniture in the household. Some even had family crests carved into the headboard. Others had saints embroidered into the sheets. The bed wasn't just for sleeping. It was a display piece. In noble houses, guests were sometimes brought into the bedchamber on purpose just to admire the bed, its materials, its height, its carvings, its imported silks. A kind of power performance cloaked in domestic charm. Because in a world with no banks, no credit scores, no Twitter bios, your furniture was your resume. And your bed the centerpiece. But let's say you weren't rich. Let's say your bed was simple, shared, tucked in the corner of a one-room house. It still said something. Because even among the poor, people watched. They noticed if your linens were clean, if your mattress was aired, if you had herbs tucked into the corners to ward off vermin, if you had a pillow or just your arm. Neighbors talked. She sleeps with 2 blankets, they'd whisper. Where did she get the money? He's been seen washing his sheets every week. Who's he trying to impress? Because keeping your bed clean was tied to morality. A neat bed. Virtue. A messy bed. Laziness. Or worse, lust. Priests preached about it. A chaste housewife rose early, they said, made the bed, swept the chamber, dried the linens in the sun. A sinful woman lingered. Let the sheets go damp, invited sickness or temptation. The unmade bed was a symbol of decay. And it wasn't just about women. Men were judged too. A man who slept too long in bed was considered weak, unmanly, slothful. A hard-working man was up before dawn sometimes, before first light, leaving the bed cold and empty before the rooster even stirred. And when the bed was shared, people noticed who entered and exited. Not just lovers, guests. Let's talk about hospitality. To offer someone a bed in your home was a sign of honor, trust, generosity. Even the poorest homes made space. A traveling priest, a cousin from another village, a merchant passing through. You didn't turn someone away if they needed a bed. You shared. But how you shared it mattered. Did you give them a place by the fire? Did you let them sleep beside your child? Did you give them the family blanket? Or did you stick them by the door next to the draft? These choices weren't just about comfort. They were judgments. They revealed your values, your suspicions, your preferences. Beds became part of reputation management. In noble houses, which chamber you were offered was everything. To be invited to sleep near the lord or lady's room, an honor. To be given the attic space above the kitchens, a slight. to be refused a bed at all. A scandal, and people remembered. Guests who were treated poorly sometimes wrote about it, in letters, in journals. I was given only straw, one noble grumbled. Not even warmed by a servant. The sheets stank. That wasn't just complaining. It was a declaration I will not forget how you treated me in your house. But there was another side of this too, because sometimes the absence of a bed was louder than its presence. Take monasteries. Many monks and nuns slept without beds on purpose, just a blanket, or even the cold floor. It was a show of humility, of rejecting worldly comforts, of saying, I do not belong to this world. Their poverty was their statement. But let's return now to the world of marriage. Because even within households, the bed was a stage. Husbands and wives might sleep in separate beds or even separate rooms, sometimes by choice, sometimes by necessity. But everyone watched. A wife who refused to share her husband's bed. A threat to the household's stability. A husband who never visited his wife's chamber. Cause for gossip. Even the position of the bed in the room mattered. Was it against the wall, modest, unobtrusive, or centered like a throne? Was it close to the fireplace, warm and well lit, or tucked in a cold, dark corner? People read into these things. They interpreted, because the bedroom wasn't just private, it was symbolic. And if someone had no bed at all, if they slept in a stable or on a bench or curled in an alley, they were outside the system. A beggar, a traveler, a criminal, a lost soul. Without a bed, you had no place. And yet even the bedless carried their own meanings. Sometimes a penitent would sleep without one choosing discomfort to purify the soul. Sometimes a widow gave up her marriage bed forever, turning it into a shrine or a memory. And sometimes a woman would leave her bed in the night, slip out quietly, and never return. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was walk away from the bed that was meant to define you. But not yet. You're still here, still lying in it, still listening. The mattress beneath you creaks softly with memory. The air hums with centuries of watching eyes. And somewhere someone is whispering your name. Not out loud, just in memory. Because the bed records more than bodies. It remembers meaning. We're almost done now. But next we'll look at the strangest medieval bedtime habits, the things people did before falling asleep, the objects they kept close, the prayers they swore by, and what it meant to truly let go. So don't drift off just yet. There's more to see. You're fading now. Your body's warm. Still, folded into the bedding, like a letter pressed between worn pages. You've walked through palaces and peasant cottages, ghosted past nuns and kings, lovers and widows, and still the night isn't done. Because before sleep comes, there's one final layer to peel back at the bedtime rituals. Because even if you only had a straw sack and a flea-bitten blanket, you still had a way of preparing for sleep. You didn't just fall into bed. You prepared your soul. Let's start with what was closest at hand, the objects at the bedside. For many, the first was a rosary. Smooth wooden beads looped on a leather cord placed beneath the pillow or hung from the bedpost. Even those who couldn't read knew their prayers. The rosary wasn't just a devotional tool, it was protection. A kind of spiritual sword against nightmares, demons, or worse, doubt. Then came the cross, carved from wood, wrought in iron. Some were simple, others elaborate, inlaid with bone or silver. It hung near the bed, always within reach. Some people kissed it before lying down. Others pressed it to their lips and whispered the same Latin phrase they had every night since childhood. Libera me Domine. Deliver me, O Lord. You feel the weight of those words even now. Then there were saints' relics, tiny bone fragments, bits of cloth, sometimes housed in amulets and tucked into bedding. These weren't for show. They were a lifeline, a protection against sudden death. If you died in your sleep, and many did, you wanted to die near something holy. But physical objects were only the beginning. What truly marked medieval bedtime was the ritual of prayer. Everyone, rich or poor, devout or half-hearted, was expected to say something before sleep. Not long, not formal, just something. Children were taught bedtime prayers from the age of 3. Some of these were gentle lullabies to the Virgin Mary. Others were darker. If I should die before I wake. Yes. That's medieval. That's real. The line may be softened, now modernized, but the original intent remained. Prepare to die. Because sleep was always a rehearsal for death. When you closed your eyes, you surrendered your body. Your soul wandered. Your breath slowed. And who knew truly if you would open them again, and so people made peace. They forgave enemies. They confessed sins quietly or into the linen. They named names in the dark, in case the words never reached the light again. Sometimes couples turned away from each other before sleep, not in anger, but in solemn tradition. To face east, to face the crucifix, to face the wall and whisper secrets not even their spouse could hear. And then silence, but not total, because the night was not silent in the Middle Ages. It breathed. You'd hear the fire crackle, rats beneath the floor, dogs shifting outside, the low murmurs of someone talking in their sleep, the rustle of wind against the wooden slats, and always the church bells. They rang at set intervals throughout the night, marking canonical hours. Monks rose at matins at lauds. In some towns, the bells tolled to warn of fire or to mark a death. You might wake just slightly and hear the bell toll 3 times. You'd cross yourself in the dark and fall back under, because your bed, however narrow, however humble, was now an island. Not just in space, but in time. The medieval night lasted longer than ours. Without artificial light, people slept more deeply, more often. Sometimes in naps throughout the day, sometimes in 2 long chunks across the dark. But in between, there was stillness, not boredom, not restlessness, just presence. People lay awake without reaching for anything. There were no books by the bed, no clocks, no flickering screens, just breathing, thought, maybe a whispered conversation, maybe a song. Yes, some people sang themselves to sleep. Low, wordless hymns, folk tunes, psalms half remembered from Mass. Mothers sang to babies. Widows hummed to themselves. Night was a time for sound, but never noise. Even love happened quietly. You didn't need to speak. Just fingers brushing fingers. A weight shifting under blankets. A breath drawn in unison. You'd curl close. Press knees to knees. Let skin replace language. And the body, aching from labor, bruised from childbirth, or simply lonely, would exhale and surrender and sleep. That was the real secret of medieval bedtime. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't always safe. But it was honest. There was no illusion of control. You didn't know what the night would bring, so you honored it. You made peace with it. And if you were lucky, you dreamed. You turned in your sleep and saw someone familiar, a father, a child, a lover long gone. You whispered to them in the half-light. And when morning came, you forgot their face but not their presence, and you rose. So now as you lie here, you carry that memory too, of 1,000 people before you, lighting one candle, whispering one prayer, laying down on straw or feathers or stone, letting go of the day, welcoming whatever would come. We're almost there. But there's one more chapter, the final one. And then, rest. You're almost asleep, but not quite. There's still a flicker of thought behind your eyes, a warmth in your chest, a sense that the story hasn't quite released you yet. You're still lying in that ancient bed not yours, and yet somehow entirely yours. Because by now, you've worn 100 names. You've slept beside queens behind convent walls, in fields and in stone towers. You've whispered secrets into pillows, clutched relics, feared the Mara, confessed sins in the dark. You've given birth. You've died. You've come back. And now the night is full of echoes. Let them settle around you for a moment. Think of the sounds, the wind scraping a wooden shutter, the distant toll of a church bell, the soft weeping of a widow in the next room, the creak of a rope mattress under too many bodies, the low murmur of a bedtime prayer in a language that hasn't been spoken in 500 years. Now think of the textures, the itch of coarse linen, the weight of wool blankets pulled up to your chin, the chill of night air on your neck, the straw poking through the mattress, the warmth of someone else's back pressed against yours, not a stranger, not a lover, just someone who didn't want to be cold either. And now remember the rituals, because that's what the medieval bedroom was at its heart, a place of ritual. You bathed before bed, maybe, or maybe you didn't. You hung your amulet from the bedpost. You touched the crucifix. You whispered a prayer you didn't entirely understand. You stretched out slowly, careful not to wake the others. And you waited. Not just for sleep, but for whatever came next. The night wasn't just for rest. It was for remaking. People went to bed poor and woke up blessed, or cursed. They went to bed uncertain and woke with visions. They went to bed with one heart and woke with another. They went to bed alone and sometimes woke to find that they weren't. Because sleep was where transformation happened. You might have gone to bed as a servant, but wake up having dreamed of rebellion. You might have gone to bed a grieving parent, but wake to a voice whispering in your ear, telling you they're safe now. You might have gone to bed fearing death, but wake surprised to find the morning sun warming your sheets. And even when the bed was hard, and the fleas bit, and the world outside was cold and cruel, the bedroom still offered one thing: a pause, a quiet, a space where the world stopped spinning, just for a little while. And even if it wasn't safe, even if it wasn't yours, even if it was shared or cursed or filled with ghosts, it was something, and sometimes that was enough. So now you lie in your own bed centuries later, No straw, no chamber pot, no iron scissors hidden in the sheets. But you carry their breath in your lungs. You sleep with their stories beneath your skin. You're part of the same tradition, every bit as human as they were. And maybe, just maybe, they're sleeping beside you still. You've made it. The candles are out. The wind has quieted. The last bell has tolled. And the bed, whatever shape it's taken tonight, has finally embraced you. You've seen it all now, haven't you? Not just kings and queens and cloistered nuns, but tired shepherds, soot-covered mothers, heartbroken servants, people who slept with hope and fear and longing, people who made space for love and grief and ghosts, people just like you. And maybe for a little while you forgot the century you were born into. Maybe the flicker of your screen felt more like the glow of a candle. Maybe the sound of your fan humming in the background became a lullaby you don't remember learning. That's the magic of history. Not just dates or wars or crowns, but this, the quiet, the breath before sleep, the centuries stacked on top of each other like folded sheets. So now let yourself go. No more thoughts, no more stories, no more wondering what comes next. The past is tucked in around you. The present has softened. And the future, it can wait until morning. Sleep deeply now. Dream strangely. And if you wake in the middle of the night just for a moment and feel something brush against your shoulder, don't be afraid. It's just history turning over in its sleep.